All right. Good evening, everybody. So I don't see you guys because it's a webinar, but I know you're there and hope you can hear me. You'll be able to chat, post questions on the chat, or ask questions, which is the goal here to address your questions. So, welcome. And this is a very, on the one hand, special, a moment, or time, or stage in your life when you are working on the next phase, a very important phase in Dir B'Tachtonim, in our purpose in life, to settle down, to raise a family, and to really create a small Beis HaMikdash in your own home, and the search for the partner who that's going to be is difficult, as we know. It can be Kekriyas Yamsuf, hopefully not. But I believe that the goal of these webinars is to put out there as much information and hadrach as possible to try to make the process a little bit easier. So many times we hear from people who are saying later, I wish I had known this, I wish I had known that. So what we're trying to do is to take these questions that many of you have asked and try to address them as much as possible to allow you in this very important but sometimes difficult and anxiety-provoking process to hopefully reduce that anxiety a little bit and make it a little bit easier. So many different phases. I don't know where each of you may be holding in terms of the process. So before getting to some of these specific questions, and it's just me tonight, just one of us, so I know it's for an hour. I think it's easier when there's two people for an hour, but I'll see how many questions we can get to, and feel free to ask any questions, continue to ask any questions in the chat. So if the audio is not coming through, whatever it is, just let me know. So before addressing some of the, sorry about that. What happened there? Before addressing some of the questions, I would like to just cover something I know may have been covered already, but just the title. When we talk about the word dating, right? That it's not so much about the words that we use, but when we understand a little bit more what it is we're trying to do and what it is we're trying to accomplish, and what it is we're not trying to accomplish, that can help us answer a lot of questions. B'chlal in life, when questions come up about should I do something this way or should I do something that way, sometimes the best way to answer that question, if we understand what our goal is, if we understand what our objective is, and where we're trying to get to and why, then the question of how to get there becomes a little bit easier. So there's a lot of technical information, a lot of questions about halacha. Should I do this? Should I do that? Is this appropriate? Is that appropriate? And in a certain sense, having a certain clarity on what it is we're trying to accomplish can help answer a lot of these questions. And we'll try also get into some of the details of the questions. So the term dating is not really the best term. We can first ask the question, why get married, right? Why do we get married? And the reason why we get married is not in order to be happy, right? Is not in order to find the person that will, fulfill our needs or whatever, that kind of thing. To find the partner for life, to, because we've been alone. Those are all true points as well, and important parts of the marriage and important parts of a relationship. But ultimately, it's because it's a mitzvah, and the mitzvah is to get married, as it says in the Torah. To get married is to start a family. So that's the first thing in terms of the mindset and the clarity when it comes to shidduchim. It's not really dating. It's not a boy and a girl spending time together. It's rather a process of finding a shidduch, of finding your bashert. In other words, who is the person who is destined to be married to you, and the two of you together will be building a home together. So the process will always be focused on that goal. And the questions that come up, should I do this? Should I do that? How should this be done? How should that be done? Will all be focused on getting us to that goal of being able to find the person. And therefore, the reason why we're spending time together, when theoretically, if you think about it, the halachas of tznius that teach us about men and women not interacting in general, so why is that suddenly different when you're going on shidduchim? And when we have clarity about the answer to that question, we can also help understand what a lot of the boundaries are. So the goal over here is to meet someone and to find out if our values are the same, if the personality is a match, and if there's amshachas alei, right? Those three things, which maybe we'll talk about those three a little bit more. That's what it's really all about. So you need to spend time, potentially as much time as needed, to find out, besides what you find out already on paper, but you need to find out in person whether this is the person that you can be married to and can actually be your partner, and look at all the different elements of it. And that's the reason why you're davka spending time together, and davka spending time on what we call dates in different settings, to be able to get the best of your ability, a glimpse. And of course, it's all hishtadlus, and everything else is ultimately going to boil down to bitachon, but we do the hishtadlus and the research and what we can. And so again, the focus isn't just to spend time and have a good time, but the focus is how to find your bashert, how to find the person that you're going to be starting a family with. And a lot of the questions get answered in that way. So therefore, just to address one question straight, how involved should a boy, a bacher, be, in the process beforehand? So really, that's one of the reasons why we talk about, let's say, ideally the family not telling a bacher the names of every family, of every suggestion that comes up. If there is a suggestion, which after the parents have done the research, or reaches a certain point where it seems to be shaykh, then you can find out about it. Why do you need to know about every person that was suggested? What's the purpose of that? But if there's someone that it seems shaykh, based on the research, and part of that includes one of the other questions that came up over here, which I want to talk about and focus on, is the question of the communication between the bacher and the shadchanim and the parents, etc. And that communication includes clarity. This was spoken about previously, the clarity as much as we can about what we're looking for. And that's the big question, like how do we know what we're looking for, and how do we communicate that? So there's a lot to talk about on that topic, but I just wanted to address one question, is that the involvement beforehand, as much as possible, until it comes time to actually start the shidduch, to actually start the data, bacher is not involved, ideally. If he has family members or others that can do the groundwork beforehand, but they need to know what it is you're looking for, as much as you know. You may not know everything, and there's a process to be able to sit down and clarify for yourself what your values are, what's important to you in life, and therefore what you're looking for. That's easy to answer, because once you have clarity on your values, you just copy paste. You're basically looking to marry someone who has the same vision, the same values in terms of what a Yiddish chassidus home is. And then in terms of personality, it's not necessarily someone who's the same as you, but someone that you believe you can get along with. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit more. And then third of all, the idea of amshachas levin and any other details that need to be addressed or included. So by communicating that to the people who are involved, let's say to parents, for example, then they'll know which questions to ask. Now, important question that comes up is, what if there's conversations or disagreements, or let's say you're telling your parents, to look for a particular thing, and they disagree with that, they have a different approach. So, there's two things about that, right? Number one is how to have the conversation respectfully, and then what to do about it. So it is, if you have, especially if you've done work with a mashpia and you've clarified that something is important to you, in a sense, your parents may feel the same way, but they may not feel the same way. So you do have to be clear about what it is that you're asking, what it is that you're looking for, etc. But at the same time, you have to understand that your parents who have more experience than you and older than you, and also have their own fears or their own thoughts about whatever it is. So um, we need to be respectful and kind of understand where they're coming from and process that. So there's a way to have an open communication where maybe there's a disagreement, maybe there's different perspectives. Nobody's out to get anybody, but your parents are coming from a particular place. You can understand where they're coming from. You can process it, and you can see if that's something that you agree with or if you don't agree with. So there is a certain amount of involvement beforehand where you're communicating with the people who are involved, with the families who are involved, and clarifying for them kind of what it is you're looking for. And one of the things that comes up about that is if there's a certain element, if there's a certain element which is somebody will say to you, well, you don't want anyone to know that about you because then maybe people aren't going to want to marry you, right? Which is one of the questions that's asked, is at what point do you have to reveal certain information? So obviously it depends what it is, but if there are certain things which are more open or more just truth about you, which by these things being in the open, that means that automatically there'll be less people interested in you, right? So that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. In other words, you're trying to find your bashet. You're not trying to marry everyone. You're not trying to have as many suggestions as possible. You're trying to have the suggestions that are most compatible, right? Compatibility doesn't just mean, a good boy, a good girl, but it means that there's something particular in terms of values, in terms of personality, in terms of what Bochur is looking for, that it is a compatible, it is a match. So therefore, Adrabah. I mean, this we have to be carefully think through this with the advice of a mashpia or a shadchanim or parents. But there are certain things that by putting it out there, putting it on a resume or being out in the open about it, certain people will not want to continue the process. That may be a good thing because this way we're getting closer to going out with someone that's more shaykh. In other words, the work that's done beforehand is based on the clarity that those people helping you have about who would be compatible for you based on what you're telling them and based on what they see. Then they know how to do research so that you don't even find out necessarily about potential names or potential prospects unless some work has been done and it looks like, at least on paper, that it's shaykh, and then we can go from there. So this leads to a whole bunch of questions, and we can continue asking questions. We're going to address some of them later. About the actual dating process, the shidduchim process. And a lot of these questions that are asking, the answers to these questions really all boil down to the same idea. What is the purpose of dating? And we leave it to that. The purpose is to find out whether it is shaykh or whether it's not shaykh. Therefore, on the one hand, you're, so to speak, looking to impress. In other words, you want to make a good impression. You want to make sure that you're showing that you're being respectful, that when you meet someone chashuv, when you meet someone important, of course you dress up, of course you make sure that you look good, of course you show that this is meaningful to you and it matters to you, but at the same time, you're not looking to be a perfect tzaddik, you're not looking to show yourself as someone very far from the reality, because ultimately the question is, will the two of you, the way you really are in real life, will the two of you be able to be a good match? Is it a good shidduch? So therefore, davke, if something happens, if imperfections show up, if you make a mistake, if you forget something or whatever it is, or the other person does, that's very, very important, because this is how you see how things work in real life. Of course, you never know exactly what everything means, but as much as possible, being that we're not going to live our whole life in a hotel lobby, you want to be able to, the purpose of spending time together and all the different types of dates that you may do would be to determine and figure out what this might mean about the person. It answers another question: which elements are an issue? When is it an issue? Is it an issue or not an issue? Something, whether it's about the person directly or about their family or about this or that or whatever it may be. A lot of times the question comes up, is this a problem? Is that a problem? So nothing should be ignored But the ultimate question about whatever the question is, whatever the topic is what does this mean practically? How is this going to show up in the relation? How does this impact the relationship? The question is, does it matter that her family is whatever? Well, it does matter. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The first thing is to understand or imagine what that means. How does that play out in the future? What is that like when you have your children coming to visit their grandparents, right? Also, more important, how did this impact her? Yeah, she's lived through this or this situation or that situation, or grew up here or grew up there, whatever it may be, whatever the background may be. What does this say about the person right now? And therefore, what does that say about the potential of compatibility? And then when it comes to the actual dating itself, the appropriateness and tznius when it comes to dating is until you're married. And kol shekain, if you're not even engaged, you're just trying to see if this is the person you're going to get engaged to. But even after you're engaged, you're not married yet. You're not in a relationship yet. You're not a couple. So therefore, any interaction is, if needed, is needed. But we do as needed, not more than that. And we have to remember and understand and continue to follow the appropriateness in terms of the boundary of tznius, right? So for example, a question might be, or one of the questions here is, how many dates should one go on? What's, too many dates? How long in general is considered too many dates that you should know direction at which point? It's very hard to give a precise answer, right? But when you focus on what the goal is, what the purpose is, if someone is going into this with the mindset of, the purpose is, I just want to have a wonderful time. So then is there a limit to wonderful time? As long as you're having a wonderful time, you continue, right? But if the goal and the purpose is clear, which direction is this heading? Is this someone that potentially I'm going to get married to or not? Now, on the first couple of dates, you're not thinking about that yet. You're just thinking about, do you want to go on another date? But from date 3 and beyond, as you're starting to get to know each other more, as you're becoming more clear on each other's values, each other's personality, and you're starting to notice anything that may bother you or anything that's coming up, as you're processing that from one date to the next, you are getting more and more clarity. And if you need more time to spend more time together, to ask more questions, to discover more things, then you got to keep doing that. And that's fine. But when you reach a certain point where there isn't any purpose, there's nothing new being learned, whether it's emotions, whether it's information, so then there's no point in continuing. What are we continuing for? And we know the famous answer about taking a break if need be. If everything seems to be fine, there's nothing more to learn. It's just a matter of not having the feelings or not having the emotions. Okay, then take a break and see what happens. It's very, very important to have some feelings, which means a certain sense of looking forward to a date, of feeling that you can be yourself around this other person with her, and a mindset or a perspective where you can imagine that if we are to get married in Mitzvah Shem and live together, then we can really love each other at some point in the future. It doesn't mean you have to be experiencing love now. It doesn't mean you have to be experiencing strong emotions now, but you have an emotional pull of a sense that this is something that you can see it working out. So because you keep remembering what the goal is, that's why there are certain boundaries and limitations. You don't just keep going on dates forever, unless there's something specific that you need to figure out. At the same time, don't ignore anything. I believe that it's very important, ideally, before you marry someone, to know what you don't like about them. Everyone, in every relationship, when you get married, there will be things that disappoint you about the person you married. You have certain dreams and visions, and no one is going to live up to all of those expectations. So there are going to be certain things about the other person that you marry that isn't everything that you want. In addition, there are things that are going to annoy you about the other person. I don't mean to scare you. I'm just telling you, in reality, that's how it is. There are going to be certain disagreements or conflicts that are going to happen in every relationship, in every marriage. What would be ideal is that you're fully making a choice, which means that before you get married, you already know, if you can, a little bit, what it is that annoys you about the other person, what it is that the arguments are going to be about what it is that they don't have that you wish they had, and you make a choice because those things are lower down on your list. Those are not the most important things. I can live with that. I can live with this. I can live without that, whatever it is, and you choose it. There's not necessarily any surprises. So therefore, because you have that perspective again, therefore, when you see a chisaron or you see a problem or a red flag, something that's bothering you, you're not running away from that. You're not saying, uh-oh. You're saying, oh, good. Let's look at that. Let's see what that is. Let's analyze that. Let's speak to whoever it is, Yedidim, Mevinim, Mashpia, whoever it is that you're processing things with to understand what that means. And is that something, what does that necessarily mean? And what would that mean in the future? And is that an issue or is it not an issue? A question that's being asked is about a picture. Is it appropriate to see a picture before you go out? So appropriate, look, you do have to see someone before you choose to marry them. In terms of a picture beforehand, I may be a little bit old-fashioned, but personally, my concern is that a picture is not an accurate depiction. So there are exceptions, potentially, and if there's a specific reason that you need to see a picture, something specific, there is room for that. But I think that ideally, the first time you see someone is when you see them in real life, which is more what they really look like, rather than a picture. I've had experiences with this where somebody looking at a picture gets a completely different, you get a sense of what a person looks like from a picture that's not necessarily accurate. So when it comes to questions of yichud, it's very important to brush up on the halachas of yichud, because remember, you're not in a relationship. This is someone that halachas yichud, hilchas yichud apply, right? A girl, a woman who you're not married to, you're not allowed to be alone with her. And what does that mean exactly? Right? So there are halachas of yichud. There are many different svarim and places where you can get an overview of hilchas yichud. There's actually a sefer called Tara Kahalacha that's for chasanim to learn, or for people to learn about getting married. But in there, in the English version of Rabbi Farkash's sefer, chapter 20, he has over there a very good overview of hilchas yichud, which there's a lot of questions that come up about where you go and what time, making sure that you're basically on well-lit streets and it's not too late at night and there's people around and you don't go into, a place, a locked room, or whatever it is. In some of these places now that they're offering where you can go on a date in a private room in a home or in a basement or something like that. The door needs to be open. It needs to be that people should be able to come in. And remember that yichud is a halacha that applies to everybody. Even Moshe Rabbeinu has to keep the halachas of yichud. Not necessarily only someone that we suspect may do something wrong. It's the halacha is there for everybody. So it would be a good idea in terms of how long to spend on a date. It would be a good idea. I know a little bit all over the place, but just following these questions, it would be a good idea to have, first of all, an understanding which you can either communicate through the shadchan, or at least, if not, communicate with her when you're on a date. Is there any particular need to be back at a certain time? If she has something happening the next day, might not be a good idea to stay out too late, number one, practically. And number two, you don't want to spend too many hours and you don't want it to be too late. Again, it's not appropriate or tznizik to be up till 4 o'clock in the morning, with a girl, even though it's someone that you're going to be potentially marrying, but we're trying to focus on whatever is necessary in order to get to know each other, to see if you can marry each other. And therefore, that boundary and that remembering that it's not like all of a sudden now, because you're going to potentially marry her, now all of a sudden there's no more boundaries and it's not, a boy and a girl. Now, by the way, in terms of the concept of Sherman Negia, which has been covered a little bit, just to clarify that any kind of contact, the word shomer, we also use for shomer kashrus, shomer Shabbos, right? We use it for things that are not just a chumrah or a good idea, but in case you don't know, the halachas is pretty strong, that we paskin like the Rambam, which is that any kind of contact, any kind of touch is also min ha-Torah, especially if it's an enjoyable touch, and even if not, there's a debate about that. But any kind of contact is absolutely also, at least it's mostly also min ha-Torah, and therefore it's a really big deal. And it's important to not get into any kind of and this is when you're engaged as well, not to get in any kind of environment. Yichud helps with that, but to have a very clear feeling and clarity of the fact that there's a boy and there's a girl and there's appropriate tzniustic boundaries there in place. And even when you're engaged, that's why engagement is a really hard time, because when you're engaged, this is the person you're going to be married to, but you're not married to yet. So it's nishtahin nishtaher. It's a very difficult time emotionally, because you do need to maintain a connection. You do want to make sure that there aren't hard feelings. You do need to see each other and speak to each other, besides for the technical elements of getting ready for marriage. But at the same time, it's just for for the technical purpose of there shouldn't be hard feelings, but it's not really appropriate to get closer or to connect too much, and therefore it's very confusing. It's a very confusing time. But what can help us is if we continuously bring ourselves back to what is our goal, what is our purpose, and does this fit with the purpose or does it not fit with the purpose? I just want to point out that being that you are spending time with a potential bashert, with a girl that you may get married to, one of the things that you want to be able to show, you want to be able to demonstrate, is that you're a safe person. Because you're bringing a woman into your home to marry her, part of that is the role of the man, the role of the husband, is to provide safety, not just financial safety, but all different kinds of safety. And part of that safety is the fact that you are someone that has certain values and you stick to those values. And even though you have instincts, you have emotions, right? Your values are stronger than that. You're able to stick to your values. So the very fact that you have situations which it may be difficult to keep certain boundaries, but the very fact that you stay clear to the boundary, that actually can create or demonstrate a certain safety that's there. And this is maybe, I guess you could say, an additional explanation, more psychological explanation to the idea of if you get too close, when it's not time to get close, that could lead to distance. There's, of course, the Ruchnisdik explanations, but also on a very simple psychological explanation is that when you get close, when it's not time to get close, it might feel good in the moment, but it creates a little bit of distance because there's a little bit of fear, a little bit of lack of safety, of like not really knowing what the boundaries are, not knowing which other boundaries are going to be broken at what times. So by having a clarity of what the purpose of the time is and only doing what's needed for the time, that actually creates safety. Now, on the topic, it's important to also remember something else. When we are trying to do something right, when we are learning, whether it's in tonight's talk or the other talks, or learning about what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, answering a lot of these questions, and you're learning about the right and appropriate way to go about things, there's different ways you could approach that. You could approach that from a perspective of anxiety, where you could always be terrified. What if I make a mistake? What if I'm doing something wrong? What if I'm crossing a boundary? And there's room for that. There's place for Perek Aleph when it talks about the basic yira, basic fear to avoid doing something wrong, but that's a very basic level. And the concern is that you can't really fully engage and be connected with whatever it is that's going on and be comfortable enough to ask questions and to answer questions and to really figure anything out if you're so uptight and stressed and anxious and uncomfortable in your own skin. So it may take some work to be able to find the right balance where you can be relaxed, you can be comfortable, you can be present, you can be connected. And the way to do that is to look at all of these ideas that we're learning about as the right way to be. To focus on trying to do things right and trying to do things in a holy way, in a Hasidic way, in a proper way, rather than focusing on not doing it wrong. So that leads to answering another question, which people are asking about what's appropriate to do on a date. What kind of dates? What about someone wants to go to an escape room or mountain climbing or bowling or restaurants? And there's a few different elements to that, right? The first thing is once again to go back to our trusty old answer that answers all of our questions. What is the purpose here in dating? So can you first of all explain when you have a choice between option A, option B, option C, and obviously with coronavirus and with other things like that, sometimes it's pashut a limitation of options. But what would the goal be? What would the purpose be? Well, it's a lot of fun. Okay, but is it necessary to have a fun experience to see what that would be like? Maybe. But the particulars of that will be, first of all, we want to understand how this is part of our goal. And just by the way, that doesn't mean that every single word that you say on a date has to be purposeful in the sense that, you have a worked out script of exactly what you talk about, exactly what you ask, and you don't have to show them say a single word that, no, because part of getting to know someone and finding out if they're a match with you is also seeing what it's like when you're not necessarily talking about something, when you're not necessarily having a conversation, when you're talking about other things as well, or just walking around and talking about nature or whatever else it might be. There's another element to this, which is an individual knowing who they are, and in terms of chassidishkeit, because some of these things are questions that a Bochur would ask his mashpia, not necessarily in relation to a date, to a shidduch date. And remember that part of shidduchim is looking for someone, but also showing them who you are. Right? So if there is something which is very much part of your personality or something that you do, and something that you would do with your family or with your friends or whatever it may be, right? Then that's one thing. But in terms of which types of activities or locations are less appropriate or more appropriate, it's hard to give a blanket answer, but it would be important to speak to Mashpi about that and see if this fits with the spirit, first of all, of halacha. Is it an appropriate thing? Number two, chassidishkeit, based on being honest with yourself, who you are, and what you're trying to represent. And then third of all, is this in the spirit of getting to know each other and seeing if this indeed is the person. Now, while we're on the topic of seeing if this is indeed the person, I'm going to, this question has been asked already, addressed already, but how do you know if it's the right one? And I'm not going to get into too much detail right now, but the short answer is, as soon as you find the person, the first one that matches is the one, right? Meaning, mashgacha pratis, there's a lot more than one person out there that you could be married to, but we're only going to get married to one of them. And so when you spend time with someone and you find out that their values are the same as yours, you find out that their personality matches with yours, you have some hamshachas alev, you've thought through all the things that bother you and annoy you. And don't forget, by the way, what the Rebbe says, that when something annoys you just a little bit and you think, I can tolerate it, when you're not living in the same room, in the same house as somebody, things bother you less. Think about when you became your friend's roommate, or you went with a chavrusa or a friend on Merkah Shlichus, and certain things started to bother you that never bothered you before. So you want to think about it in that context. But if you've processed all of that and it makes sense, and the only question left is, well, how do I know? What if there's someone else who's better? Or how do I know this is the right one? So the way you know that it's the right one is if it makes sense, and if they have the qualities, and if it fits, and that's the first one that you've met that fulfills that, bashgacha pratis, that's the right one. And then the rest is going to be up to you. If you learn the next step, which is once you get engaged and get married, you learn about shalom bayis and you learn how to engage in a healthy relationship, then that will be the right one. So these same kinds of ideas answer some of these other questions that are being asked about when you're engaged, going furniture shopping, buying jewelry, preparing, talking about getting married and all these things like that. It all falls under the same category again. That, what is the particular purpose? Yes, certain decisions need to be made. Maybe chassan and kala together, both need to decide about it. There could be communication. If you're going shopping in certain areas or doing certain things, maybe have someone else come with you. The mindset always is to basically remember the boundary of tznius and to be engaging together in whatever it is needed for logistical needs, for the purpose of what it is that you're trying to do. Question that was asked is it okay to split the dating costs more evenly? So, of course, we know that the official expectation, right, is that the boy will, or the boy's family will pay for the expenses. Yeah, they tell a story that a Bochur goes on a date, and she notices that he has something in his pockets. And as they go, they sit down, they come to a hotel or whatever, they're sitting down, and he pulls out a slab of potato kugel from each pocket and puts it down on the table. And he says, "You want some?" And she is totally not interested, of course. And he says, "Okay." She says, "No, thank you." So he says, "Okay, great, more potato kugel for me." Right? So there are, I guess, what's kind of expected, and what's going to happen is like this. So the default, or the official way that it's supposed to be, the expected way that it's going to be, is the way it's going to be for most people. Sometimes you have a unique situation, and also sometimes you have a unique person. In other words, you have someone whose nature is that they're outside of the box. So maybe not on the first date necessarily, but as time goes on, part of being authentic and part of showing the fact that you are a little bit out of the box, or you're looking for someone who's a little out of the box, whatever that means, whether do things not as traditionally. So maybe, so obviously I'm not talking about any violations of halacha or tznius or anything like that. I'm just talking about the official traditional ways that don't necessarily have to be that way. Then adrabah. What happens sometimes is that let's say a bochur is specifically looking to find someone or to marry someone who is a little bit unique or is a little bit different, and they're being told, let's say, by given advice by someone saying, no, you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. So it's important to respect that and to listen to that and to process that. But to a certain extent, there are situations where you dafka want to show that part of you. You dafka want to see kind of how that lands or how the other person receives that, if that's something that they appreciate or don't appreciate. Which leads to another question, which is, do you have to marry someone who is interested in the same things that you're interested, or the same style as you? And the answer is no. You don't have to love the same things. I'm not talking about values of what's important in terms of priorities of Yiddishkeit. I'm just talking about, let's say one of you is really into music and the other one not as much, or one of you has a personality that's a little bit more loud and the other one's a little bit more quiet. There's nothing wrong if the personalities are different, or you have different interests, different hobbies, different things that you kochen. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's not something that you judge as bad or negative, as long as you can respect what the other person is into. Which leads to another question, and again, we kind of covered it already a couple of times, but when your gut is not fully agreeing with what you're being told by a friend, by a shadchan, by a parent, it's not feeling genuine for you, it's not feeling right for you. So a good idea will be to find someone that you feel safe with, a mashpia or someone close to process it with. Because look, when we're on shidduchim, adam karav etzel atzmai, and Kabbalah Emes Misha Emre, there probably is some wisdom in what the older people are telling us and what our parents are telling us. But again, you want to process that, and you want to see ultimately, is it for you, is it not for you? B'chlal, the advice that friends will give you, it's probably not a good idea to talk to friends about pratistic things that are going on in your shidduch, maybe general ideas of like what are some places we can go to, and it's actually good to talk to someone who's recently gone through the experience to get some advice about certain things. But remember that friends or others who are maybe not in the more professional arena as a shadchan, or parents who have done it several times, sometimes the advice that they give will be not so much advice, but more their own experience. And just because it was their experience doesn't mean it's going to be your experience. So what I'm basically saying with regards to a lot of these questions is that we're trying to constantly find the balance between being authentic you and following certain guidelines that you're being taught and told, and basically trying to bring those two together, ultimately towards the same goal of deciding who it is that you are going to marry. And in our circles, we specifically leave that decision with the guidance of others, but the decision up to the Bochur, the boy and the girl, to decide if they want to marry each other or not. Besides the inyan of tznius, in terms of what you should or shouldn't share with close friends, also just basic idea of privacy. It's really no one's business what, something that somebody that you're dating, girl that you're dating, who you're dating, the name of the person you're dating, and also personal information is really nobody's business except for the people that you need to speak to about it. We have to realize that when you print something, when you say something like this recording right now, right? When you put something out there and someone hears it, they hear it, they absorb it, right? So you can't just ignore what you heard or forget what you heard. So information that's private about other people, exactly who you're dating or whatever else, is something that we have to be very thoughtful about who we share it with and how, to protect everyone's privacy and respect. A question that comes up is, if there's something bothering you about the girl that you're dating, should you bring it up to her? Should you talk to her about it? So it's going to depend where you're up to. The short answer is yes. It's going to depend where you're up to. It's probably best to process it. That's why I believe that there should be at least a day in between dates. There shouldn't be dates back to back. You need some time to process it, to think it through, and maybe discuss it with others and see anything that came up for you. You don't ignore anything that's coming up, because remember, you're not trying to make it work. You're trying to see if it will work. So therefore, you don't want to ignore, before the decision. You don't want to ignore anything. You want to think it through and see, is this an issue? Is it not an issue? So one of the things that you want to see as well is, if there is a challenge or if there is something that's bothering you, how does the other person receive it if you bring it up and talk about it? You may want to first process it with somebody else, because you may not know why it's bothering you or what's bothering you about it. And it may have nothing to do with the other person. It may just be your own stuff. But in many situations, it is a good idea to talk about it. If something's bringing up some energy for you, if something is bothering you, you need to talk about it. At least talk about it with someone else first and see. And an interesting question is, in terms of emotions versus the intellect. In other words, when you're feeling strong feelings and that could get in the way, how do you make sure that that doesn't get in the way of, researching or making sure what you have to make sure about, right? So the truth is, it's important to realize that strong feelings and emotions and attraction and connection at the beginning is not necessarily a good sign. It's not necessarily a bad sign. It doesn't necessarily mean one way or the other, but if there's really strong feelings right away at the beginning, some people say that some professionals say that may actually be an indication of you're picking up on something that reminds you of previous interactions or childhood, which may not necessarily per se be a good thing, right? So what's really important is that you make sure to do due diligence and pay attention to the important questions, and then you'll see if those emotions are still there, or if they get better, they get worse. B'chlal, if you're not sure about how the emotions are going, you can look at the dates and see if it's staying the same, if it's getting a little bit better, if it's going down. And another important thing is to also be aware of your own anxieties and your own fear. One of the questions that's asked here over and over again is, how do I know if it's just me being afraid to commit, or me being afraid of marriage, or there's something specific about this person that's bothering me and is turning me off? And sometimes it's hard to tell, but again, if you process it with somebody else, don't ignore anything, but process it, talk about it. Ideally, a mashpia, or someone who is experienced with this, helping you process and unpack what might be going on. Then you're able to differentiate between the difference between something objectively that's an issue that you shouldn't ignore, and just the overall fear of commitment and the fear of connection. So a question is being asked, What should be done in the case the parents cannot be involved with shidduchim, especially research? So, look, there are extreme situations where you may have to do the research yourself, but really, ideally, you want to do everything you can to find someone else to do it for you. So if it's not going to be your parents, it could be a shadchan, or it could be a friend, or it could be a mashpia, or a shluchim, or somebody. And there's a few different reasons for that. Besides the tznius idea that a girl that you may not end up going out with, why do you need to know? Why do you need to know all that information? And it's not appropriate to be, asking questions, especially if some of the questions need to be asked to friends of this girl. Also, because there's no reason why you need to be focusing on these things. On the one hand, finding a shidduch is something that you do in the sense of like a lost object that you put a lot of hishtadlus in, but that hishtadlus could be getting other people to do it, delegating other people to do it. So meanwhile, until it's time to actually go on a date, you can be free to focus and chaparain, focusing on learning and focusing on continuing to be a Bochur as long as you can, while others do the research. Just make sure to check in with them and see how things are going. I got a question here that I'm not sure what it means. Maybe you can send it again. I'm not sure what that question means. Okay, let's see what else we have over here. All right. So one of the things to look out for in the question that was asked here about if a shadchan is passing on messages back and forth between the chassan and the kala or their families, that's not the right messages. In other words, things get a little bit lost in translation. Right? So, everyone has their strengths, everyone has their chesronos. And if you have an experience like that, you want to learn from the experience. You really want to try to find someone that ultimately is going to be there for, on the one hand, using, their expertise and their experience and their guidance and their hadracha, but at the same time being respectful to what the chassan and kala are, not chassan and kala yet, what the young man and the young woman are looking for, and what they're saying, and to correctly, transfer the information back and forth. And again, sometimes what you need to do is be a little bit assertive about that and be respectful, and in a respectful way, say that I would like you to do this or to not do that, and be clear about it. Don't just go along with the flow, but if something is bothering you and something's important, make sure to speak up about it and discuss that. Okay. Really, for the first couple of dates, so when do you start getting more serious and talking about more deep things, and maybe even revealing more information that's a little bit more private and a little bit more sensitive. So it's hard to give an exact black and white answer, but you need to kind of process and see how things are going. Usually we say not until the third date for sure, because the first two dates are more kind of Jewish geography, basic, just conversations, just seeing if you're able to tolerate each other's company and if you're interested in continuing to see her again. And from the third date is when you start to get a sense of course there are exceptions, but you start to get a sense of where this is going. And then you really want to find that balance. And this is why it's hard. This is why it's good to have someone guiding you, because it's hard to know the balance, what is too much and what is too little. You're trying on the one hand to be open, to be vulnerable, to express things, to kind of see how that goes across. And on the other hand, the potential that you're not going to marry this person means that you want to be really thoughtful about what they know and what they hear. So is it important to use a shadchan? I think that's the question, right? And is it possible to do without one? So there's a couple of different points to this question, right? So shadchan can mean different things. There are professional shadchanim that are very useful. First of all, many of them will meet with you and get to know you, and many of them will know young women and can hopefully try to be instrumental in finding a suggestion, finding a shidduch, as well as being in between. Now, you always want to have somebody in between, That doesn't necessarily have to be professional shadchan. It could be someone else, someone that both of you respect, but there should be someone in between to communicate the details of the dates and after the dates. Again, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I believe that until you've made the decision that you're going to propose, there should be somebody in between processing the back and forth information about the next date. Are you going to go on a date? Because it needs to be a decision. In order to be a decision, it needs to be clarity and safety to be able to honestly share whether you want to continue, whether you don't want to continue. And when you're talking directly to each other, you don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, whatever it is, not as conducive to being able to make a full proper decision with that safety, as well as the reminder in terms of tznius that this is not someone you're married to. So not necessarily appropriate to just chat with each other about anything and everything. How do you know if the first date went well? Well, if you want to see each other again, then it went well. And there's different kinds of went well. If you made a mistake, if something went wrong, and you see how the other person reacted to that or how you reacted to that, then again, that's a good sign. It's important to remember, in terms of a date going well, that it doesn't mean that you had what to talk about the entire time, that you were able to fully flow with conversations the whole time. It's okay to have quiet moments. It's okay to not know what to say, especially if you're able to tolerate being quiet and not feeling like you have to fill the whole time with conversation. And once again, it's basically expected that the boy is going to be the one to initiate the conversations. And if you have a hard time initiating conversations, then you might want to have prepared different questions that you can ask and different things that you can do. But you also want to be kind of spontaneous, and you also want to talk about all different kinds of things as well. And I guess it depends also where you're up to. But at a certain point, you want to become a little bit more real. And if you're not the kind of guy that's always leading a conversation, always asking questions and interrogating whatever it is, fine. Besides the fact that it doesn't all have to be interrogation and questions. One of the ways that you can find out more about each other, for example, when it comes to values, right, or when it comes to knowing more about each other, instead of grilling each other, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Is just talking about your life. Talking about your family, talking about how you grew up, different experiences that you had and how you felt about it. So for example, instead of talking about, here's how I'd like my Shabbos table to be, you can talk about Shabbos tables that you were at in the past and what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, what you want to copy, what you don't want to copy. It could be more a story and sharing rather than necessarily like a drill of interrogation. Now, if you felt like the first date went very well, you want to go out again, but the girl doesn't want to continue. So there's not much to say about that. If she doesn't want to continue, she doesn't want to continue. You may try to find out why. Often they're not going to tell you. But if you can find out if it was something specific that you did or whatever it is, that could be helpful for the future. But it's very possible that if she doesn't want to continue, it's just because she has a strong sense that you're not for each other. Remember, not marrying someone or not compatible doesn't mean that either one of you is negative. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or something wrong with her. It just means maybe you're both perfect, just not for each other. So for some reason, she doesn't want to continue. If that's not a maybe, if that's the way it is, then you may not have picked up. In other words, from your perspective, you may feel like it would be a good match from what you've seen so far. But we're going to have to trust Hashgacha Pratis that probably if you had continued, it wouldn't have worked out, because obviously it's not meant to be. You're going to have to move on. Which leads to the question of, what should someone do if they can't get a previous date out of their mind and they keep going back to that person and thinking about that person again and again? And it's very, very difficult. But you have to remember that if you're not married to someone and you haven't spent many years with somebody, it's not really possible that you are attached particularly to that person. The strong feelings that you're having, or the strong connection of things that you really liked about the person, or things that you liked about that person. And if that's very important to you, you find someone else that has those things or maybe not those exact things, but it at that stage, it's something about the person that you're very attracted to, but it's not necessarily the person herself, because there's whatever qualities you're looking for, there's more than one person in the world with that quality. Hang on one second. So tips for the first date. Tips for a first date. So you've met other people before, whether it's in a Chabad house, or you're sitting next to somebody on an airplane, or you meet a Bochur for the first time in yeshiva. So it's not the first time in your life that you've tried to start a conversation with somebody. And just the same way you would do it with anybody, starting off by getting to know that person, getting to know who their family is. In Lubavitcher, we have the different connections, this one and that one, and whatever it is, you kind of start the conversation. Of course, it's a little bit more, maybe a little more awkward and uncomfortable. But you can start with just getting to know the person, getting to know a little bit more about them. Tips for a first date is to have a good plan about where you're going, maybe even scout out the area first and see what it's like. Make sure it's not closed and they're going to let you in with or without a vaccination card or whatever it is. So kind of have the plan organized in advance, maybe even have a plan B, make sure that you have parking figured out, and you're taking her out and you're paying for it. Figure out if it's going to be an Uber, if it's going to be you driving, whatever it may be. And when you get a drink, so you may want to just brush up on the halachas about that. If it's a cold drink, just water without any lemon or lime in it, then you can, that's fine. Even if it's in a tray for glass, as long as it's all clean, you can order it. You may want to say to her, what would you like to drink, rather than do you want to drink? And it probably not a good idea to take too long, especially if you're feeling like you don't have so much to talk about. It's okay if it's just a shorter time, just a couple of hours. If you kind of know in advance about how long it's supposed to take, let's say 3 hours or so, and by the end, you may want to, when you notice the time, suggest let's spend a few more minutes, and you don't want to seem to be rushing out of there. Maybe a good idea in the middle of the date at some point to take a break, to use the bathroom, to give her an opportunity as well, both of you, to kind of just have a moment to kind of think things through. But ultimately, number one, the first date is not a time to decide if you're going to marry her or not. And also, you don't even want to be processing anything while you're there. It's not a time to, what does this mean? What does that mean? You'll process it later. Just try to be there. Just try to be menschlich. Of course, you want to dress properly. You want to make sure that you've brushed your teeth. You want to make sure that you're, a mensch, right? Being menschlich about that. See over here, another question. Okay, what happens if you want to know how she feels about the date, and the shadchan just says that she wants to continue? Maybe she's just being pressured to go out. So I want to address this question and many other questions that can come up on these topics, which is the question of what if, right? What if questions can happen all the time in all different kinds of life. But when the what if questions are coming up, so how much do you investigate? How much do you need to find out the hidden meaning of what's really going on, or just take things at face value? So certain things are obvious, right? And it's okay to sometimes ask, whatever it is, but part of dealing with anxiety is learning to live with the unknown, with the maybe, the magic word maybe. Maybe it's not necessarily your job to figure it out. So you can pretty much go along with face value, but if there's something that's sticking out to you, something that you're noticing, you can talk about it. You can ask, you can bring it up. Again, as a disclaimer, like I said at the beginning, it's very hard to say things in general because every situation is different. And if you're not sure if you should bring something up or not, or ask something or not, you can try to process it with somebody who is more familiar, who can maybe help you decide. But ultimately, if something's bothering you or eating you up, it probably should be mentioned, and it probably should be investigated. And it's not necessarily your responsibility to make sure that the other person is completely comfortable. In other words, your job is to be respectful, and your job is to try to help the other person to be comfortable. But at the end of the day, she's also an adult, and if something's really bothering her, it is also on her to say so. So you can be respectful, but you don't need to be anxious and worried and nervous. And like I said before, Bichlal, whether it's halacha wise, Hasidishkeit wise, or just practical wise, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Just focus on trying to be there and trying to do it right rather than trying to not do it wrong and trying not to make a mistake. Okay, so we have reached 1 hour, 10:45. Anyone have any questions they want to ask at this point? We'll address those questions, and if not, we will. Again, these podcasts are going to be continuing in Mitzvah Hashem. So if anything wasn't addressed, it can always be asked again in the future. Also, if you want to speak to me at any point one-on-one directly, so I'll put my phone number out over here. It's 201. See if how it works over here. So 201-870-1770. My website, chassanim.com. And, just if you're trying to process, whether it's to try to process, how do I know what I'm looking for? Or stuff is coming up as you're dating. How do I deal with this thing that's bothering me? Is it an issue? Is it not an issue? That kind of thing. Okay, so I see there's a few more questions. Is alcohol okay to get on a first date? So, okay. Is alcohol okay to get on a first date? It's probably not a good idea. I think it really depends on who you are and what alcohol does to you, and also what it represents for you. So, if you're that nervous and you kind of need the alcohol to calm down, then that itself is also something to look at. But I would be thoughtful about that, especially because, especially at the beginning, you really want to be fully in control of your capacities. Is it fair to ask a girl to arrange a date? So not at the beginning. You're going to arrange the date, and obviously there are situations where, let's say, you're going to the location where the girl lives and you've never been there, and she may know or have better ideas. They can pass that information on to you, but it's at least initially the responsibility of the Bochur or his family to take the initiative and to organize it. But as you get to know each other and it turns out that she's the kind of person that likes to be more assertive or in charge or make decisions, and you're happy with that, then you can try that out as well. Is there an ideal age to start shidduchim? And the answer is pretty much as young as possible, as soon as you've completed your basic training in chinuch. When you've learned in yeshiva, you've gotten smicha, shlichus, whatever it is. In other words, the only reason not to get married is because you're still completing something important that should be done beforehand. And besides that, a basic menschlichkeit or a basic, maturity, as well as if there's any particular elements within your Avodas Hashem and your personality, mental health that's being worked on, addictions, whatever it may be, that needs to be done beforehand. But if there's nothing specific you can point to that needs to be done or worked on before you get married, if it's about when am I going to be fully developed as a mensch, well, that's a whole lifetime. So that's the ideal age. Can you push off dating to go to college? So ideally, not really. In other words, a lot of this has to do with the hashkafa of how you see your purpose in the world. In other words, why are you going to college? If you're going to college in order to get a degree, to be able to do a particular parnasa, to be able to support your family. So obviously there are different factors, including the fact that guys who are dating when they are getting courses, by the way, the question of going to college, obviously something you speak to Mashpia about. But in a situation where you're very, very busy with work and you're not going to be able to focus on dating, well, that's obviously an issue. That's obviously a question. But ideally, especially if it's something that's going to take a long time, um, one could try to find a way to get married and then continue with that. Obviously, there needs to be a financial plan. How are they going to support? How's he going to support the family? Until he is able to start that particular parnasa. What if the girl? Okay, I'm not sure what that question is. What do I do if I get pulled over by the cops? What's the best way to react? So I'm not sure if you mean you're getting pulled over by the cops because you're speeding or because you planned in advance some kind of surprise, that the cops were going to come and surprise you with a cake or something. But the best way to react is the best way that you would want to react. If you consider yourself a mensch. Probably to get into a fight with the police is probably not the best way to react. But you may want to question, why did you get pulled over? And if you were speeding or whatever it is, you may want to consider driving better. If you were ready to tell her no after 4 dates, but she said no first, and then got you more excited about her to the extent you want to ask her to try again, the feeling didn't go away after a few months, how would you interpret the new excitement that you have? So this sounds like maybe it's a particular situation, not just a theoretical question. But in order to interpret anything, interpret any emotion, you may not know how to interpret emotion, but it's not something to ignore, and you may need guidance on how to interpret emotion. You may be able to figure it out by thinking about it, by maybe the new excitement that you have is because you had a certain clarity or certain realization, or whatever else it may be. So it is important to try to interpret what that excitement is. Sometimes, especially when a buffer tries to, they say no, and then they try again with the same person and say no again. You kind of want to look at that and see what that excitement is. Is it just going back to what's familiar and doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, is probably not a good idea, but you have to see. Okay. If you get tired when driving, is it okay to ask her if she can take over? Yeah, I guess so. You might want to do some better planning. So if it's going to be a time when you're going to be going on a date, you want to get a good night's sleep the night before. It might not be the best night to stay up the whole night for bringing. And if you are going to be tired and you know that you're going to be tired to drive or whatever, are you going to be too tired to focus on the date? Okay, so that's something to think about. Maybe if you're lechatchila too tired to drive, maybe you want to take an Uber or something like that. But if need be, if it's not safe and you need her to take over in driving, then sure, absolutely. What's your opinion on a girl that orders a cocktail or beer on date 1 or 2? So my opinion is that this is a girl who orders a cocktail or beer on date 1 or 2. In other words, this says something about her. Either you're so annoying that she's trying to drink some alcohol so she doesn't have to be annoyed by you, or this says something about her and her personality or her values. So it's like anything else, it's interesting information, which the question is, does that fit with what you're looking for or not fit what you're looking for? So it's not the maisa itself of what she did, but it's more like what it represents about her personality. Is she the kind of person that likes to drink a lot? Is she alcoholic? Or is this just the kind of thing that she does with her friends? Is she that kind of person that likes to drink beer with her friends and kind of wants to do the same thing with you? Again, it's very hard to know where it's coming from because, I don't know. But maybe if that's something that completely goes against your values, then that's important information. If you're not sure yet what that means, maybe more time will tell about that. Should you be concerned about the alcohol? Yeah, maybe. I guess it depends. It depends if she's drinking a lot of alcohol, and maybe. So see, a lot of the answers to a lot of these questions are that you kind of, you don't ignore it, but you kind of process it and see what does this mean about the person. Just imagine, remember, you're marrying someone based on who they are now, not that they might change. So what does this represent about them in the future, potentially? Okay, any other questions? All right, I guess that's good for now. If anybody has any other questions, Yeshukayach for your participation. Oh, not sure how it works when someone raises their hand, but if you raise your hand, you just type your question, if that's okay. Okay, thank you for tonight. That's a good question. The answer is you're welcome. It's my pleasure. I don't know if I know any of you, as I can't see you, but Hatzlacha Rabba with all of you. Continue to search, continue to ask questions, continue to learn, and continue to trust in and have bitachon. You do your hishtadlus as much as you can. You delegate to other people so you don't have to focus on it. But when it comes to time, it's okay. It's okay to be nervous. Do your best, and hopefully the clarity will come. And the Eibushter should bench you all with Besor Stoivus very, very soon. When you get engaged, Mitzvah Hashem, chasanim.com. Be in touch. All right, Hatzlacha Rabba, all the best.